Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Janome Skyline S3. In this video, I'm going to show you some basic useful stitches. So to start with, when you turn on your machine, it's going to be in straight stitch center needle position. Now, if you were going to do a back stitch at the beginning and at the end, you would go something like this. Forward, push your back stitch button, let it up, and keep stitching. And then, of course, you could do a back stitch at the end when you're done. Do your cutter button, and there you go. Well, what if you could kind of combine those into, say, less button pushes, okay? Well, to start with, you'd want to have your thread cutter on, so that anytime you do a lock and stitch or an automatic locking your thread stitch, like a back stitch, that would cut your threads afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that. First of all, I want to tell you, I'm using my knee lifter. Notice, no hands. Okay, the knee lifter is a great tool to have with this machine. And we're going to go to stitch number 02. So we're in 01 now, we're going to go to 02. What this is going to do is put a back stitch automatically right there at the beginning. And where you always want to sew on your fabric, not off the edge of your fabric, because you don't want those threads to tangle. So make sure you sew on about 1/4 inch in from the edge, about like that. Okay, so I'm going to slow it down so you can see what it's doing right here. Goes forward about 4 stitches, and then it goes backwards the same amount. So it's going to start right. It's going to go right back to where you started before. Now I'm going to speed it up here, because we don't need it that slow. Now wherever I want to stop, I just push the reverse button right there. It goes back, and see, I keep my foot on the pedal. That is right where I stopped and pressed the reverse button. It went back and forward, right to that spot. So that is a wonderful stitch to have when you're sewing your garments, because it gives you, it really speeds up things when you're garment stitching. Okay, so another wonderful stitch would be 06. Let's say you're a quilter, and more than likely you are when you have a machine like this. Is a great quilting machine. So first thing we want to do is we want to change the foot to the quilting foot here. Now it doesn't say exactly which foot, because actually you can use this foot or several different other feet for quilting, but this is the one you want because you're only going to be stitching straight. This is going to give you that little fence on the side. I'm going to put this under here. I'm going to press your foot down. There we go. Make sure you have your thread under the foot like that. Now, if you look here, you see how the needle is moved to the right a little bit. That's so that this will give you a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance as long as you run the edge of your fabric right along that little guide right there. Also, the stitch length has been shortened. That's because in quilt piecing, you're not adding a back stitch at the beginning and ending of every stitch. So basically, the short stitch length acts as a sort of a anchor to keep those stitches from coming unstitched. If you had a back stitch everywhere, it slowed down the process, and it would also make it so that there would be more bulk in there because there's more thread. So that is very common to have a 1.8 or a 2.0 stitch length. And the 8.3 means that the needle has been moved over to the right. So here we go. And where I'm watching is right there. At the end, I'm going to just cut that off there just so I can show you. See how nice and even this is all the way down there. So that's going to give you a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. You actually can move this over a little bit more so you can get a scant 1/4 inch right there. I'm going to stitch over this so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. This is not how you'd normally put your quilt together, but there may be a quilt pattern that you are using that calls for a scant 1/4 of an inch. Well, that's how you could do that, because there's a little bit of room. When you choose this stitch, it knows not to move the needle over too far one way or the other, because it's pretty sure that you're using this foot here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to stitch 01 right there. We're going to put our presser foot on, the thread under the needle. Now I want to talk about stitch 09 right here. That stitch is a triple stretch stitch. So what it does is it goes 2 stitches forward and 1 stitch back. Actually I may as well just show you that. Okay, and I'm going to go really slow so you can see what it looks like. See, 2 stitches forward. Whoops. I should put it in 09. That would help. 2 stitches forward, 1 back, 2 stitches forward, 1 back. So it puts 3 times as much thread in your seam. Nice thing about that is if you're trying to make an extra strong seam, you've got 3 times as much thread as you would in just a single line of stitching. This is also really good for anywhere, like if you're making a bag or something and you want to have that extra strong seam, you can do that. But what this really shines in is fabric that's on the bias. Let's say you have a curved seam on a garment, like the armhole of a jacket or the back crotch seam of some jeans or something like that. And that curved seam, at some point in that curve, is going to be on the bias. Now, nice firm fabric like this, on the straight of grain, you don't have much stretch, but on the bias, you have a lot of stretch, which explains why the back seam on pants crotches, sometimes the thread breaks because there's stretching that happens there. But with this, you can stretch it all you want and it's not going to break. By contrast, a single line of stitching, see how that stitching is broken right there? It's because it has nowhere to go. It just stretches there. It hasn't been triple stitched. So triple stitch, great stitch. It also makes a beautiful top stitch if you want to have a nice bold top stitch. Okay, we also have buttonholes here. Here's an example of the type of buttonholes we have. Now this is your standard square-ended buttonhole, which most of the time that's what I use, and that's this button right here. If I push that, that's the button. That's the buttonhole I would get. But you can also make other buttonholes, and they are illustrated up here. Okay, now I want to show you number 35. It kind of looks like an odd looking stitch, 35. Well, that is a bar tack stitch. So I'm going to show you what that's good for. Bar tack stitch is like if you're going to put a pocket on an apron or shirt and you want to have a little extra stitching up there to keep that, keep it from tearing loose or coming loose, especially an apron. I mean, you're using that pretty for work, right? So we would want to put a bar tack right there. So I'm going to go like this, and you put your pocket so that the pocket's kind of facing away from you. So this would be the top of your pocket, and you would have sewn along here already. Then you start right where you want the top of the bar tack to be. So you see I'm moving the hand wheel. Here we go, like that, this. Okay, and whenever I start sewing, I always like to kind of hang on to that thread tail for the first couple of stitches. So what this is going to do is going to start out giving us a locking stitch, then it goes back, marches backwards. Oh, okay, I'm going to start that over again. I didn't hold my thread tail well enough. Let me just start over here. Hold it off to the left. Okay, I'm going to reselect that stitch because it's kind of out of the, there we go. Now, what I'm going to show you is I want to make a bar tack that's 1/4 of an inch long. The default for this bar tack is about 5/8 of an inch, but I'll show you how to make it shorter than that default. So it makes a locking stitch, and it starts marching back, go one more, then I'm going to push my reverse button like this. It takes one more stitch back, and then it does a stitch forward, and then it does a zigzag across those little stitches, does a locking stitch at the end. And since I had my automatic cutter, it cut the thread. So here we go. I'm going to take out that extra little bit of thread there. That's fine. So this is your bar tack. Now we can make as many, now that I've set it, you can make as many bar tacks. Say if your project had 10 bar tacks, they would all be this same size. If you decide to shorten it or lengthen it, then you would have to go back in. You would need to go back in and reselect stitch 35. Now you can make it a different length depending on where you push this reverse button. Just make sure to push it a little bit shorter of a bar tack than you want it to be, because it'll take one more stitch back. So that's bar tack. Then I wanted to show you what R is for. You see these little lines up here? They just look like little lines going across. Well, what's that? That is this here. See how beautiful of an applique stitch that is? Nice and neat satin stitch all the way around. That's what 41 is for. There's other stitches here that can be used for applique, but they're more for your folded edge applique. This one is for your raw edge applique. Now these letters here, M, M, R, the ones that are next to these mean that, for instance, for 41, which I just showed you, the stitches, if you're going to change the stitch width or length, let's go to 41, say stitch width, it's going to stay the same on the right. So if I wanted to take a deeper bite into my applique, I could change it and it would stay the same on the right, but it take a deeper stitch to the left. Okay, that's what R means. M means it widens or narrows from the middle outwards, so on both sides. So, and there's lots of other stitches you can use for beautiful things and useful things. I've used 45 actually to make a sort of decorative edge, finishing a raw edge. That's a good way to do that. So there are other useful stitches on here, but I just wanted to show you these and kind of get you started and help you know what's going on with your machine. I appreciate you watching. There are a lot of other videos on this machine that we have done. Take a look at those. And there are videos on other machines that may be helpful for you to learn other things on this machine too. And we're going to do some process videos later. So if this has been a helpful video to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave them in the little area down below. So thanks for watching. Happy sewing. Bye for now.